This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's October 7th, 2022. I'm Ross John Fortune. More than 10 years ago, the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act was passed by Congress and signed by then-President Obama. The law bars the use of non-public information for private profit, including insider trading by members of Congress and other government employees. In the decades since, enforcement of the Stock Act has been lagging, and members of Congress have found their way through the box truck-sized loopholes in the law. In a recent Business Insider investigation, the site found dozens of dangerous conflicts of interest among members of both houses of Congress and both parties, including Senator Dianne Feinstein and Tommy Tuberville, and Representatives Diana Harshbarger and Pat Fallon. And according to data compiled by Open Secrets and Smart Insider, there are a dozen other members of Congress who have had some other direct financial investment in the defense industry while sitting on committees related to appropriations and the Pentagon. Members of Congress and good government groups like the Project on Government Oversight have been calling for a better congressional ethics law regarding stock trading. Pogo's Dylan Hetler-Gadet spoke to our show in August about the ways Congress finds itself outside of the rules.
Right now, there are almost no ethics rules for members of Congress around A, what kind of financial interest they can have in terms of stock ownership in some of these very same companies, and B, what kind of campaign contributions they can receive directly from those very same companies. But you see kind of an ethical negative feedback loop here.
Recently, Representative Abigail Spanberger and a bipartisan group of lawmakers have been leading the charge on a broader congressional stock trading ban. Perhaps in response, Democratic House leadership released a bill late last month that includes loopholes and, according to critics like Spanberger, is doomed to fail. In addition, the bill has yet to come for a vote and was introduced before a congressional recess period. Spanberger ripped into the bill, calling it a, quote, kitchen sink package that they knew would immediately crash upon arrival. She also questioned her party's leadership. Representative Spanberger is a Democrat representing Virginia's 7th District in the United States House of Representatives. She's also been a leading voice for stricter rules in the legislature about the stock market. After a short break, she'll join me to talk about ethics, the Stock Act, and Congress.
When a shiny new technology pops up, when a newly discovered flaw exploits a bedrock legacy system, when Congress and leadership demand modernization but won't provide more resources, when every update is critical, you need analysis that cuts through the noise to tell you exactly what you need to know. Join the Next Gov team as we speak with relevant federal leaders and experts to break down the science, the tech, the policies, and the people behind the latest emerging technologies. Subscribe in the Apple Store, Google Play, or through your favorite podcast platform to make sure you get the latest critical update.
At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, multiple senators sold millions of dollars worth of stock between a January 24th, 2020 private briefing and the market crash just a few weeks later. It certainly brought up questions as to whether they acted on sensitive insider information, but unfortunately, there is little to prevent members of Congress from doing this sort of thing, and attempts to shore up the rules have been thwarted. For example, after rejecting a more comprehensive bill, House leadership recently brought forward a stock trading bill that is full of holes and likely dead on arrival if it even gets a vote. Representative Abigail Spanberger is a Democrat representing Virginia's 7th District in the United States House of Representatives. She's also been a leading voice for stricter rules in the legislature surrounding stock trading and ethics. She joins me now to discuss ethics, Congress, and her role in getting stricter rules enacted against individual stock trading. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we talked on this show before about the import of ethics, particularly when it comes to public service and what ethics pledges that federal employees need to follow. Now, you, having worked at CIA, know this up, down, left, right, and center. So can you kind of talk about the import of these ethics when it comes to public service, and particularly when it comes to Congress versus the executive branch?
Well, absolutely. I think overall issues of ethics are a central priority for me because it's about the public trust. And certainly anyone in a role of public trust has a responsibility to not just be trustworthy, but to be willing to jump through some hoops or over some hurdles to demonstrate that. Certainly during my time at CIA, among the things we did is we would have full scope polygraphs to maintain our background checks and our security clearances. And so, I've sometimes said to some of my colleagues, of all the kind of hurdles that one can go through for a job that they want, being strapped to a chair and have someone asking you highly invasive personal questions, like those are the things you do if that's the job that you want. And when it comes to Congress and banning stock trading, the real crux of the issue here is that we take votes that can move markets. By virtue of our title, we can have meetings with business leaders across sectors. I've been in multiple rooms, had multiple lunches with CEOs of, everyday household name companies. And they talk very openly and freely with members of Congress for the purposes of the types of conversations that we're having. But to note that then someone might be able to leave those meetings or leave a classified briefing, as was the case in the early days of the pandemic, and make stock purchases based on what they know, what they heard, it just is wholly inappropriate. But in addition to that, the fact that the American people see members of Congress outperforming the stock market and perceive that there is this kind of unethical behavior that is, happening, that should be enough for us to want to make reforms to even remove the mere perception of impropriety and not just actual occurrences, rare or otherwise, of impropriety.
So what's holding it up? What's holding up the real progress on things like stock trading bans, or even just bulking up enforcement of the Stock Act?
Not everybody wants to do it. It is bipartisan in its support and bipartisan in the opposition. There's a couple of different bits of pushback that I've gotten. And certainly some people have said, by passing this legislation, we're confirming or we're demonstrating that perhaps members of Congress shouldn't be trusted. To which my response to that is, the American people across the board don't trust their members of Congress nearly enough. So let's do something to affirmatively show that we deserve it. And then other people say, I'm just a regular person. Why should I have this limitation? I'm not doing anything wrong. And back to that, I say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then surely this shift, this change shouldn't matter. And if ultimately the idea that having to move your money into a blind trust or into diversified mutual funds is enough that it would prohibit you or stop you or make you not want to run for Congress, then perhaps your heart isn't really in it and you should pursue a different professional endeavors.
So this sort of compromise that has, I guess, come up late last month came from House leadership, the so-called kitchen sink package. What are the problems there, and what are the hurdles? I mean, I mentioned in the intro that it's probably not going to get a vote, or it might be dead on arrival, but can you sort of tease that out and what, more than anything, what the real problem is there?
Absolutely. So first, and I would say that House leadership, the Speaker, the Chair of the House Administration Committee have put this forth as this notion of a compromise package, but it isn't. There's no compromise between any parties because people who've been working on this issue and prioritizing this issue were not included in kind of House leadership's effort to direct this. Among the things that occurred is, for starters, those who have been really digging into this issue legislatively were cut out of the process. It was a leadership-driven effort, which at times can be, should be viewed with at times a wary eye. And in this case, it was the case. So we know that many Republicans, again, my bill as an example is wholly bipartisan. There are other bipartisan bills that address a similar issue. But yet, when this process was moved forward, it included not just the House of Representatives, but also the executive branch and the judicial branch. Now, independent of anything, I do think that we need major reforms within the judiciary. But two problems. One, we know that many Republicans have a very bright line at wanting to address issues within Congress, so banning members of Congress from selling stocks, and not address other branches at this time. So we knew that was a poison pill for many of the Republicans who otherwise support the bill and are co-sponsors of stock banning bills or stock trade ban bills. Notably, the provisions related to the executive branch actually would decrease the level of ethics requirements that exist within the executive branch, where there's already really pretty strong ethics requirements. And by putting them at this new level that was being put forth by House administration, we'd actually be degrading the level of ethics requirements for executive branch. And then notably, one of the provisions allows for the creation of blind trusts, but as they are defined in this legislation, they're not qualified blind trusts. They are basically blind trusts that can be called blind trusts essentially if the majority vote within Congress or the Office of Ethics in the executive branch just decides it is. So there's an actual standard for what constitutes a blind trust. In this case, this legislation would be degrading that trust, and essentially whatever is blessed by the majority vote within Congress could all of a sudden be called a blind trust. That means you could have a child run it, you could have a family member, you could maintain contact with whoever is running your, quote unquote blind trust, and really degrading what is generally understood and legally recognized as a blind trust.
Yeah, I was sort of taken aback by the redefinition of a blind trust. I know GovExec Daily guest and former OGE Chief Walter Schaub has really excoriated this plan because of that, particularly in
That's right.
He's been very vocal, obviously, about the blind trust situation back to when he was OGE Chief under Trump before he left. But that really took me aback, this idea that if you just have enough people say something is something, that doesn't really redefine it. So what do you think? You haven't been shy about talking about leadership. What do you think the motivations are in leadership when it comes to stonewalling real attempts at banning individual stock trades?
I think they don't want it to pass. It's as simple as that. And I think that for the benefit of the American people, we can disagree on whether or not this is a policy priority that should move forward. We can disagree over whether or not it should take top priority. And I think there's been a time when House leadership should just say, the calendar's busy. Sure, that sounds like a great idea. We'll bring it up later and punt, right? And I'll know they're stalling. People will know they're stalling. But the idea that we would sort of go through this kind of bad faith process by which, the House leadership would sort of reverse, because of course the speaker some time ago had said she was totally opposed and was quite critical of the idea and the need for this reform. But then to say, no, we should do it. In fact, we're going to do it. We're going to create a new bill. And each step along the way, there's been kind of a pivot and a distraction. And so there's been enough headlines. Yes, we're going to do it. We're going to do it, to kind of keep the American people and the media thinking that we were going to get to a place where we would pass this reform. And then ultimately it just, was just a stall tactic after stall tactic. But I'm going to keep pushing because it's good legislation. I'm certainly always welcome to amendments towards our bill that might make it stronger. We have more than 70 co-sponsors, Democrats, Republicans, people across the ideological spectrum. We have a companion piece in the Senate with Senators Ossoff and Kelly. And we're going to keep pushing for this legislation to come for a vote because it's important and it matters. It is one of the pieces of legislation that across our district and across ideological lines, people will bring up this legislation to me. It is a reform that is common sense, and at a time when people's faith in our democracy can be shaky, taking a positive step to say, no, we want you to have faith in us and trust in us, and we're willing to accept certain I don't want to say sacrifices because that seems like a silly phrase for it, but that we're willing to kind of self-police to make sure that not only are we behaving ethically, but that you all know that we're behaving ethically. And I think this is a very simple one that we owe to the American people. So I'll keep pushing for it and growing the coalition around it.
So we'll sort of end on that. What is the sort of move to push that? Obviously, you've got an election coming up. What goes forward? What's next? And how do you see the future of this? I know you don't have a crystal ball; none of us do. But what do you see in the future for this particular issue and ethics around Congress in general?
So we've already added more co-sponsors, even just in the past week, to the legislation. We're going to continue adding co-sponsors to it. Certainly that's a mark of just how broad the support is. I think there's 28 different states represented among our co-sponsors. And so we'll continue to push. I would love to see a vote on this legislation before the end of the year, the end of the current Congress. I'll keep pushing to make that happen, but in the event that doesn't happen, it's going to be my first priority moving forward in January to build back up the co-sponsor list and make sure that we're continuing to expand on the level of support that our bill has, that this idea has, that this reform policy has. And certainly it's going to be a major element of my priorities when I'm looking at leadership in the next Congress.
Is that part of the goal? I mean, not individually, obviously, that's who doesn't want to be part of leadership. Is that something you're gunning for? I shouldn't say gunning
for me to be? No.
Okay.
No, I mean, in terms of my votes for other people.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know you've been very, again, the leadership has been not particularly good on this issue. So I just want to clarify that that's not what you're looking for.
Thank you for asking the clarification. No, that it's important to me that we have, I think that politics has changed certainly in the past 5 years, in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years. And there was probably a time when there was greater trust automatically, but certainly as on the ground across our district, people of all political stripes, really need a reason to believe that we're working for the American people. And I think that if we are wanting to have these positions of public trust where we're making decisions on behalf of hundreds of thousands of our neighbors, that it is not too much to ask that we put certain parameters and restrictions on ourselves to demonstrate the level of trustworthiness that we have. And frankly, if telling someone they have to move their money into a blind trust or can only invest in mutual funds is a limiting factor for their decision to run for Congress, then I'm okay with that. There are millions of Americans, 435 members of Congress. There are a lot of good people out there who, certainly want to see these types of reforms. And so I'll continue to push for them. The American people deserve it.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly I know on our audience that, as I sort of brought up top, and again, as a federal executive branch employee, you can understand the disconnect there can be a little frustrating, and I'm sure that's something you hear about in your district. I'm sure you represent a fair amount of feds.
That's correct.
So, Representative Spanberger, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortune. We want to thank Representative Abigail Spanberger for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.